For such a supposedly large nation within Solaris 3, we actually have barely any information on what Huanglong is actually about. Although we get some more critical information from Choyan in 2.7, we still basically know next to nothing about Mingting or Mengzhou or the other cities in Huanglong. However, I've been mulling over this for a while, because while there isn't much that we know, there definitely are a lot of things we can infer from the information and symbolism, similar to what I've done for my Schwarzlosch and Lahairoi videos. So today, I'd like to present something that I've thought about, and what I'd like to call the Warring States theory. When we look at the name of Huanglong itself, which means yellow dragon, we can observe that the state itself refers to the mythological beast in the middle of the Chinese Sishang, or four symbols, that we've actually already talked about a lot on the channel. What's interesting is that this dragon is very important to Chinese culture because it is directly linked to the mythical Yellow Emperor, who was seen as a progenitor of Chinese culture and, in a sense, the Chinese nation itself. I won't sit here and talk about Huanglong or Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, for too long, because that would take forever. But one thing I want to point out is that the first time in recorded history where the legend of Huangdi and the cult of Huangdi is mentioned is during China's Warring States period. This is very interesting because if we look at Huanglong in Wuthering Waves, we know that it is canonically made up of 7 city-states.
There is 1 capital and 6 cities in Huanglong, with each city having its own sentinel. While they share some similarities in appearance, there are also differences.
Within Chinese history, there has only been a single time where China was split up into 7 of these city-states, being, you guessed it, the Warring States period. While it is often overshadowed culturally by the Three Kingdoms period, the Warring States period, which happened over 400 years prior, was a critical formative period not only for Chinese history, but also for its culture and identity. To give a very quick rundown, the story of the Warring States period starts really around 700 BC, during the reign of the Zhou dynasty. During this time, the Zhou emperor, who ruled from Luoyi, saw his power diminish as individual city-states gained more autonomy and power. This led to these individual city-states to begin fighting each other and forming alliances, completely disregarding that there was supposed to be a central emperor and empire uniting them. This sort of disintegration of central power lasted for nearly 300 years, and is called the Spring and Autumn period, named after the primary source we have for it, the Spring and Autumn Annals from the state of Lu. During this time, a major event called the Partition of Jin occurred, where one of the biggest city-states fractured into the 3 smaller city-states of Han, Zhao, and Wei, which most people agree kickstarted the Warring States period that was comprised of 7 major players. Long story short, because we don't have forever, and after about 250 years of fighting, because, you know, in Chinese history, am I right? The Qin eventually succeeded in conquering everybody else and formed what we know today as the Qin dynasty, China's first imperial dynastic state. Not city-state, but national state. Now, the really interesting part about all this, especially in relation to Wuthering Waves of course, was that the Warring States period, alongside the Spring and Autumn period, was as much an ideological conflict as it was physical and political. During these centuries of anarchy and conflict, a central question arose within Chinese thought and culture. How could one restore order to humans who always ended up in chaos, fighting each other? This is something Kuro and I have covered before, because it is the prevailing question of the doctrine of the Frenodian Leviathan, which was based on the book Leviathan, where Thomas Hobbes, writing during the English Civil War, was trying to basically answer the exact same question.
More own creed, lest they descend into chaos. Mortals must seek the solace of faith, lest they crumble beneath calamity. Under my guidance, Raguna will know no tears. The people shall rejoice eternal. Sacrifice and pain will be no more. Isn't a world like this wonderful?
Hang up. Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. Intel has told us there are at least 7.
Okay, I already see one. Give me. Okay.
They're the same picture.
Within the Warring States period, 3 main ideologies rose to answer this question: Taoism, Confucianism, and Legalism. Taoism solved humanity's barbarism and chaos through communing with the Tao, or the path of nature, Confucianism through hierarchies and social harmony, and legalism through strict discipline and order. What's fascinating, and perhaps beyond coincidence, is that even in the tiny amount of lore we have for Huanglong in-game, all 3 of these ideologies have either been directly referenced or alluded to already. For example, Taoism is the strongest reference we have so far. Canonically, we know that with absolute certainty that Zhangxin and Buling are Taoists, as is Changli's master, lmao. Chouyuan and Sanhua, who are related, also have a lot of Taoist iconography and themes, such as the concept of blindness and mindsight, as I discussed in my Chouyuan video. While Confucianism hasn't directly been name-dropped, it has been referenced through Changli's story, where the blaze feather, that is both very important within her story quest and is one of her cherished items, is a common symbol of the 5 virtues of Confucianism through the feather of the Fenghuang. Additionally, Changli's character stories, where she reads ancient Chinese literature, as well as the fact that she is a secretary general that effectively ensures social harmony, is very much Confucian. If that wasn't enough, one of Changli's cutscenes also directly references one of Zhang Zai's most famous quotes, who was literally a Confucian philosopher who studied Taoism, decided that it couldn't work, and went back to Confucianism. So I think that we're beginning to see a bit of a pattern here. So anyhow, onto the final major ideology, legalism. It isn't something that has been directly name-dropped or referenced in-game, but it's something that feels like it's already actually been put into practice. Let me explain. Legalism is essentially an ideology that believes that humans are inherently evil and selfish, and as such, need very strict laws that reward obedience and punish transgressions in order to control and advance society. Does this perhaps sound familiar? Now, the interesting part of this is that in the real Warring States period, legalism is the ideology of the 3 that we mentioned before that actually won. The Qin state that conquered everyone else and formed the Qin dynasty utilized and was later founded on the principles of legalism. And while legalism isn't expressly mentioned in the Huanglong law just yet, we can see hints of it already, especially based on the information that we got in 2.7 from Chouyuan's story. For one, we know that Huanglong is a centralized coalition of city-states with Mingting, which basically just means the court of Ming in Chinese, or a sort of king's court as its capital or center. From Chouyuan's story, we learn about the existence of the Internal Security Agency, a sort of secret police that only answers to the emperor in order to eliminate any misinformation or dissent. This authoritarianism, alongside the corruption that Chouyuan hints at within Mingting, which he says has changed in recent years, is actually pretty similar to the spies, the court intrigue, and secret police within ancient Chinese history. Even though the ISA in-game is actually pretty obviously based on the Ming Dynasty's Jin Yiwei, or embroidered uniform guard, which you can even see has a resemblance in-game, it was really during the legalism of the Qin dynasty that this sort of spy work, imperial assassinations, and secret police really began to be state-centralized and run. So, what can we actually take out of this? For one, I think that the 7 city-states of Huanglong, even though they answer to the central court of Mingting, may have very strong ideological differences, and considering the context of the Warring States period in Chinese history, may not even be very buddy-buddy with each other. For instance, we know that Jinzhou, as the defensive board of the nation, prizes harmony, responsibility, and duty, and it's similar to a lot of Confucian values that we see in Changli and Jinsi's stories that advocate for social harmony and prosperity for the people. Mingting is kind of similar, because from what we get from Choyun, it prizes the authoritarian but controlling values of legalism, and it even seems to be very affected by corruption and court intrigue, like many legalist empires in Chinese history. However, Buling, who is from Mengzhou, tells us a very different story when it comes to another one of Huanglong's cities. When we first meet Buling in Septimont, she tells us that Mengzhou is a lush and beautiful city that celebrates both commerce and Taoism. That was one of the 3 ideologies of the warring states in the spring and autumn period that we mentioned before, which is very interesting. We can also guess that Xin, the fox sentinel that was said to be playful and whimsical, based on the lore that we got from the moon chasing festival, is the sentinel of Mengzhou, considering that Buling's bronze mirror has a fox pendant on it. This is, as you can probably tell, very different in terms of atmosphere and attitude from what we've seen from the legalist Mingting or the Confucian Jinzhou, and it lends a lot of credence to this sort of warring states theory where all the cities of Huanglong have a very distinct and different identity. The fact that we haven't seen basically any Buddhist references, despite its importance to Chinese history, seems to support this theory even more, because Buddhism was only introduced to China about 200 to 300 years after the Warring States period. If we are to keep on paralleling Chinese culture and history with Huanglong, we will probably begin to see that when we go back to Huanglong, of course, that there's going to be some sort of tension between the individual city-states and the central authority of the king's court, or Mingting. Additionally, since we already know that Mingting is suffering from problems, corruption, and infiltration from the Fraxidus from Choyun's account, we may even be able to glean what happens when we eventually journey to Mingting based on what happened to the Qin dynasty in real life. While the Qin dynasty was legalist and prized strict order above all else, that also became one of the reasons why it eventually collapsed. When the first emperor of the Qin dynasty died, it caused a lot of instability that was worsened by the corruption within the courts, and this, combined with the anger of the people, who were oppressed under a rigid and oppressive system that suppressed dissent and freedom, eventually caused the Qin dynasty to crumble. So, assuming that Mingting is legalist, perhaps the main focus of its plot will actually be a crisis that begins with the death of Huanglong's emperor, which is exacerbated by the corruption in the court and the Fraxidus' infiltration into its government, which will lead to a near collapse of authority and, in extension, the 7 city-states. So although we really don't know too much about Huanglong, from what we can gather, and from what we've seen when it comes to how Kuro world builds nations, like Rinascita and Septimont, this framework of the Warring States' main ideologies seems like it's actually gonna give us quite a lot of insights into the cultural and political landscapes that may be explored in the future. There's tons of possibilities, and with that, I hope you all enjoyed this little theory, and as always, if you have any thoughts, questions, or criticisms, feel free to pop them in the comments. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate if you drop a sub, but besides that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day.